It was a chilly afternoon in downtown Boston. The streets were busy with people rushing in and out of coffee shops, taxis honking in traffic, and the usual hustle of the city. Karoline Leavitt, a rising political figure, was on her way to a scheduled interview at a nearby news station. Dressed in a sharp navy blue coat, her blonde hair tucked neatly behind her ears, she walked with purpose, checking her phone for last-minute updates. As she reached a crosswalk near a bustling square, a voice stopped her. "Ma'am, could you spare $1?" She turned to see a man sitting on the sidewalk, wrapped in an old jacket, his face weathered from years of hardship. His hands trembled slightly from the cold as he held out his palm, hopeful but hesitant. For a brief moment, Karoline hesitated, not because she didn't want to help, but because she knew how these situations were often more complicated than they seemed. The man wasn't just asking for $1, he was asking for acknowledgement, for dignity. People around them continued walking, some glancing at the interaction before looking away. Some seemed indifferent, others uncomfortable. This was the kind of moment most ignored, but Karoline couldn't. She crouched down to his level, looking him in the eye. "What's your name?" she asked. The man blinked, surprised. "Mike," he said after a pause. "Mike," she repeated, offering him a small smile. "Tell me, what do you really need?" Mike looked down, as if ashamed. I just need to get through the day," he muttered. Karoline studied him for a second, then made a decision. She wasn't just going to give him $1, she was going to do something more. "Come with me," she said, standing up. Mike hesitated. "Where?" She pointed toward a small cafe across the street. "Let's get something warm to eat. My treat." His eyes widened, as if unsure whether to trust her. But after a moment, he slowly nodded and stood up. As they crossed the street together, neither of them realized that this small act of kindness was about to turn into something much bigger, something that would capture the attention of an entire nation. As Karoline and Mike stepped into the cozy cafe, the warmth immediately embraced them, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air. People were chatting at their tables, some typing away on laptops, others lost in quiet conversations. It was the kind of place where life felt normal, something Mike probably hadn't experienced in a long time. A few heads turned as they entered. Some people recognized Karoline Leavitt instantly. After all, she was a rising political figure, often seen on television. Whispers spread among the customers, curious about why she was there with a homeless man. Ignoring the stares, Karoline guided Mike to a table near the window. "Have a seat," she said, with a kind smile. Mike hesitated before pulling out a chair and sitting down. He glanced around nervously, as if expecting someone to ask him to leave. "Order whatever you want," Karoline said, sliding a menu toward him. Mike looked at her, then down at the menu. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages. It was clear he wasn't used to making choices like this. "You ever had their pancakes?" Karoline asked, trying to ease the tension. Mike chuckled, though there was sadness in his voice. "Can't remember the last time I had pancakes." "Then that settles it," she said, waving down a waitress. "We'll take a plate of pancakes, extra syrup, and a hot coffee for him, and I'll have a tea." The waitress nodded, barely concealing her curiosity, before walking away. Mike sighed and ran a hand through his unkempt hair. "Look, I appreciate this, but why are you doing it?" Karoline folded her hands on the table and met his gaze. "Because I believe everyone deserves to be seen, Mike. I could have just handed you $1 and walked away, but that wouldn't have solved anything, would it?" Mike was silent for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I guess not." The food arrived, and as soon as the plate was set in front of him, Mike hesitated again, as if he wasn't sure if this was real. Then, finally, he picked up his fork and took a bite. The moment he tasted the warm, fluffy pancakes, something in his face changed. For a brief second, he looked like a man who had just found something he thought he'd lost forever. Dignity, maybe even hope. Karoline watched him, feeling a lump form in her throat. "So," she said after a moment, "tell me your story, Mike. How did you end up here?" Mike wiped his mouth and sighed. "It's a long one," he muttered. "I've got time," Karoline said gently. He hesitated before speaking. "I wasn't always like this. Used to have a job, a family, worked in construction, had a house. But then things went south. Lost my wife in a car accident. That broke me. Stopped showing up to work, got fired, fell behind on bills. Then the bank took the house. After that, it was just one bad thing after another. Before I knew it, I was on the streets, and people stopped seeing me as a person. Just another homeless guy, a statistic." Karoline listened intently, her heart aching for him. "You're not just a statistic, Mike," she said firmly. "And you're not beyond help," Mike scoffed. "That's easy for you to say. You've got everything, career, money, a future. People like me, we don't get second chances." Karoline leaned forward. "That's where you're wrong." Mike looked at her, skeptical. "You just need someone to believe in you," she continued. "I believe in second chances, and I believe you can turn things around. You just need a little help getting back on your feet." Mike let out a dry chuckle. "And what? You're gonna help me do that?" Karoline smiled. "That's exactly what I'm going to do." Mike stared at her, speechless. He had spent years feeling invisible, discarded by society. And now, out of nowhere, someone important, was telling him he mattered. For the first time in a long time, he felt something unfamiliar, hope. And he had no idea that what was about to happen next would change his life forever. Mike sat there staring at Karoline as if she had just spoken in a language he didn't understand. You're serious?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Karoline nodded, dead serious. Mike let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "Why?" "Because I believe in helping people who want to help themselves," she said. "And I think you do." Mike looked down at his half-eaten pancakes, his hands gripping the fork tightly. "I do. I don't know where to start." "Well, lucky for you, I do." Karoline pulled out her phone and started typing. "First things first, we get you a place to stay. I know a shelter that helps people transition off the streets. It's not just a bed for the night, they help with job training too." Mike's eyes widened. "Job training?" "Yeah," Karoline said, looking up at him. "You said you worked in construction, right?" He nodded. "That's a skill in demand. A lot of companies are looking for workers. If we can get you cleaned up, help you get the right paperwork in order, I think we can find you something." Mike shook his head in disbelief. "Just like that?" "Not just like that," she said. "You have to put in the effort, but I'll make sure you have the opportunity." Mike swallowed hard. He had spent years hearing no, years of doors shutting in his face. And now, for the first time, someone was saying yes. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Say yes," Karoline said simply. Mike took a deep breath, then slowly he nodded. "Yes," Karoline smiled. "Good choice." A few weeks later, Mike stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing himself. His beard was trimmed, his hair cut short. He was wearing a button-up shirt, sleeves rolled up, and a clean pair of jeans. It had been 3 weeks since that morning in the cafe. 3 weeks since Karoline Leavitt had walked into his life and changed it completely. Now, thanks to her, he had a roof over his head, a support system, and tomorrow morning he'd be starting his first construction job in over a decade. As he stepped outside, he saw Karoline waiting by her car. "Look at you," she said, grinning. "Ready to take on the world?" Mike chuckled. "Something like that. Well, get used to it," she said, "because this is just the beginning." Mike took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a future. And it was all because one person had stopped, listened, and believed in him. The power of kindness, the power of second chances. And Mike was living proof that sometimes all it took was one. It just goes to show that sometimes one small act of kindness can completely change a person's life. Karoline Leavitt didn't just give Mike a few dollars. She gave him hope, a fresh start, and a reason to believe in himself again. And that's something money can't buy. Imagine if more people took the time to listen, to help, and to see the potential in those who have been overlooked. The world would be a much better place. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more eye-opening stories like this. And remember, sometimes the smallest gestures make the biggest difference. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.